Didn't know. Hello, I'm William and I'm 11 years old. I first started fishing when I was 4 years old and I went with my granddad. My granddad's now been fishing nearly all his life, and in this video I'd like to show you how to make some very simple popple prigs. Now I've already made two. This one's a slow sinking popple prig. It's personally my favourite because it looks more natural when it hits the water. It's not like the quick sinking popple prig where it just goes straight down. Because when it goes straight down really quickly and it's a floating bait, because carp, when they get older, they get a lot wiser, and eventually they'll just know something's up with the bait, and they only suck it, and then they'll spit it straight back out. Bit like tench, really. So as soon as it goes down really quickly, that's it. I mean, you've still got a very high chance of getting a bite, but it's not as high as the slow sinking popple prig. Alright, so first you want to take around 40 to 50 centimetres of line. Seems quite a lot, but you will see why in a bit. So first, just tie an overhand loop in one of the ends of the line. It can be a little bit tricky sometimes because you don't want a really big loop. I normally make a large loop to start off with because my fingers are very thick and it's a little bit hard. So just do a large loop and then you should just be able to pull it down. I wouldn't do a figure of 8 loop knot because if you end up with a really big loop then you can't do it. So just do a regular loop, pull it down so it's not really small but it is quite small. And see, now I've done it too small there and you won't be able to get your bait stop in there. So if you've done it too small, just take your baiting needle and just make the loop a little bit bigger. Alright. Now, when you've done that, just do a couple more knots, just to make sure it's really tight. You don't want the really big knots, just to a fair size. And you don't want it too weak. So that's why I normally do around 3. Sometimes I'll do just a normal overhand knot and then do a figure of 8 loop knot. So when you've done that, trim the tag end, which is the end that isn't connected to your main line. You can use scissors or your teeth, or if you want to, you can use a lighter to blob it down. It's entirely up to you. And then you can then cut your main line. And then when you've done that, take a hook. I'm using a Kamasan B911 eyed. Where the hell have they gone? Oh. And then when you've got one out, you just want to put the line through the back of the eye. Make sure it's the back of the eye, because if you thread it through the front of the eye, it can get snapped or tangled. Make sure it's the one that isn't on the side of the point. So thread it on. I normally like to leave not a lot of space, but then you don't want it really close to your bait stop. I normally leave about that much, and then do a knotless knot to keep it secured on. Knotless knot is where you wrap the line around the shank of the hook 7 to 10 times, and then you thread the line back through the front of the eye of the hoop. And there you go. Your hook's tied on, and you should have a little loop next to it. That's where you'll put your bait stop on. And then tie another overhand loop. If you want to, you can do a figure of 8 loop knot, which is what I normally do. But it's entirely what you want to do. I normally do figure of 8 because it's a little bit quicker and it's also quite strong. So there's less chance of your hook length breaking there. When you're using any rig, you always want your hook length like pound to be less than your main line, because if you get snagged or anything, and anything snaps, it'll only be your hook length. You don't want your main line to snap off. So I'm taking that little loop next to your hook. Take your chosen hook bait. I'm using pop-ups at the minute. Use a small pop-up, and if I can, I'll fit a topper on. So when you're putting it on, just use it as if you're putting it on a screw. Just literally turn the baiting needle when you're putting the pop-up on, because it's a bit easier, and then you don't end up with a really big hole in the pop-up. Put the baiting needle onto it, slide your hook bait on, take it off the baiting needle. You then want to take your bait stop. The bait stop is what holds it in place. I'm using a little bit of an odd one, but they all do the exact same thing, so it doesn't really matter. Push it on. Now the bait stop I'm using is probably my favourite, because it allows you to hide the bait stop inside it, and then it ends up something like that. Now the hook is really close to it, because when the carp's sucking on it, it'll just, when it spits it out, because the hook's that close to it, it'll just hook it, and it's really simple. And then the carp moves its head, it's hooked properly. And then there you go, that's a very simple pop-up rig.